Week 8 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few plays I look to sell and trade this week. The first play is Javante Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javante Williams, what a game it was for him in Week 7. And I believe it's going to be the best game he'll have all season. 14 carries, 88 rush yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 catches, 23 yards for Javante Williams in the blowout victory at the New Orleans Saints. So this season, I know he's had 4 games of double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues out of 7. And I also know a good matchup this week, no doubt about it, versus the Carolina Panthers. But like I said, coming off the best game he most likely will have this season is Javante Williams. He's a sell-high candidate to me. Players on this list, I'm not saying just sell them all for anything, but if you could get good value in a deal, this would be the time to do it, because now, this week, there's no bye weeks here in Week 8, and then after that, there's going to be more than 2 or 4 teams off on bye, where more byes are going to be kicking in over the next few weeks. So Javante Williams playing good football last week, no doubt about it, the Saints. Then he's got Carolina coming up this week, and then after that, tough schedule at Baltimore, at Kansas City, 2 games where they're most likely going to be trailing early and often and have to abandon the run. And the other thing with Javante Williams, he's not much of a receiver out of the backfield, with that being McLaughlin's role. So after coming off the 26-point fantasy game in PPR leagues, he's a sell-high candidate for me this week. The next player, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. Hunt's been the number 1 running back over there for this Kansas City Chiefs team. And Isaiah Pacheco, obviously, he's not coming back at all or anytime soon for this Kansas City Chiefs team. So Hunt, he was signed a few weeks ago off the street. He's started now the last few games for this Chiefs team, and he's played good football, no doubt about it. 2 games in a row, over 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And his latest ball game at the Niners, 78 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns with 2 catches for 5 yards. So Kareem Hunt, he still has a little left in the tank for this Kansas City Chiefs team. People thought it was going to be Carson Steele who was going to be the running back coming in, but Hunt, like I said, off the street, right back into the playbook after Steele fumbled in 1 ball game at the Chargers, and they benched him. And ever since then, since Week 4, Hunt hasn't looked back. So with a good matchup coming up this week, he might go out there once again with 15-plus fantasy points. And then I think after that, with tougher matchups coming on for this Chiefs team, his numbers are going to drop off. So Hunt, like I said, last 2 games, big games for him. He's definitely a sell-high candidate this week, because I just don't believe he's going to keep it up. Next sell, Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Bigsby and this running game in general this season, it's been 1 good game, 1 bad game for Jacksonville. So Bigsby got a monster workload in the victory New England Patriots in London last week. 26 carries, 118 yards on the ground, and 2 rushing touchdowns with Dearness Johnson mixed in as well, where we know Bigsby's not a receiving back at all out of the backfield. We also know Travis Etienne, he was out with a hamstring injury, and we'll see if he returns in this week's ball game versus a tough Packer defense. But Etienne, when he comes back, he's going to get opportunity once again, where Tank Bigsby and him most likely going to be a 50-50 split or 60-40 split. So now with 2 out of 3 games plus 20-plus fantasy points in that time for Tank Bigsby, he's a sell-high candidate, because like I said, Etienne should be back sooner than later. Tougher matchups coming up versus Green Bay and the Philadelphia Eagles the next 2 weeks. And I just don't believe Bigsby's going to be 70%, 80% of the running back share he's going to get in this backfield, with Etienne splitting in, and also as well Bigsby, no upside at all catching the football out of the backfield. So this week, he's a sell-high candidate, and I think you could get a good deal for him. Next sell-high is Truba Hubbert of the Carolina Panthers. So he's definitely come back down to earth a little bit, is Truba Hubbert, even though he's still putting up some points. But the last 4 weeks, his numbers have dropped off weekly points per game. Week 4, he had over 20 fantasy points. Then Week 5, he had 17.5 fantasy points. Week 6 versus Atlanta, 15.30 fantasy points. And then last week in a blowout loss at the Commanders, 17 carries, 52 yards, and a touchdown. So like I said, the numbers have gone down over the last few weeks for Truba Hubbert. Teams are starting to zero in on him and force Andy Dalton to beat them more than Truba Hubbert in the backfield. And also, if you're trailing early and often by 2 or 3 touchdowns, you're going to have to throw the football and abandon the run, even though Truba Hubbert's a good receiver out of the backfield. And the other factor as well, Jonathan Brooks, his practice window is open. Then he's going to return any week now, I believe. And we know Jonathan Brooks, he's going to get some touches in this offense. So with all those factors and a tough schedule coming up at Denver and New Orleans, where their run defense, for the most part, have been pretty decent this season, Truba Hubbert is a sell high candidate this week. The next sell high is David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. And Njoku, it hasn't been a great year for him, but he had his breakout performance in Week 7 versus Cincinnati. 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. So Week 8, pretty good matchup on paper versus the Ravens. Give up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. But now, obviously, with Deshaun Watson out for the season, tearing the Achilles, we don't know if it's going to help Njoku or hurt him. But to be honest, Njoku, we really didn't have a rapport with Deshaun Watson. He was great last season towards the end of the year when Joe Flacco was there for this Cleveland Brown team. But now we'll see if it's going to be Jameis Winston or Thompson Robinson for this Cleveland Brown team. And once Deshaun went out with injury, Thompson Robinson stepped in. But like I said, to get 14 targets and a monster game with 10 catches for 76 yards and touchdown, that's a sell-high candidate to me because Njoku, he's been injured majority of the season. And that was his first double-digit ball game as well of the season. So right now with all those factors, and we don't know if it's going to be Winston or Thompson Robinson, Njoku's a sell-high candidate this week. The next player, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. And now with Anthony Richardson back in the lineup, all these receivers are going to take a hit. And we saw it in last week's ball game versus the Miami Dolphins. Pittman, 3 catches, 63 yards on 5 targets in that one. And Josh Downs in that ball game after 2 big games and 1 catch, 3 yards. And even Alec Pierce, he didn't do anything as well. So this offense takes a big hit in terms of the receivers for fantasy football. Michael Pittman's definitely one of them for this Indianapolis Colts team. So like I said, he had a couple good games with Joe Flacco in there quarterback. But now with Richardson back where he's looking to run the football more. And if Jonathan Taylor returns this week as well, that's even more targets taken away from Michael Pittman. So Michael Pittman's a sell-high candidate to me. And even at this point, if you just take a middle-of-the-pack running back or a back-end back, I think you got to take what you could get because this offense as a whole, especially in the passing game, like I said, everyone takes a hit and their numbers drastically go down compared to Flacco to Richardson in the lineup this season. And the final player I look to sell in trades, Anthony Richardson, mentioned of the Indianapolis Colts. So Richardson, he was 5th, 6th quarterback off the board in most fantasy drafts in the preseason and coming into the year. And he just hasn't had it, Anthony Richardson. I know the rushing upside is a big-time thing, but if he's not putting up elite numbers rushing the football, like let's say 8 to 11 points weekly, he's not really going to contribute because he's not throwing the football a whole lot. He's been inaccurate all season. I know he's banged up as well on and off all year with the rib injury and oblique injuries, Anthony Richardson, but definitely a bust where he was taken as the 5th or 6th quarterback overall. Besides week 1 where he had 30 fantasy points in that game, his numbers really haven't been anything for Richardson. And 3 out of the 5 games he started, he's had single-digit fantasy points. So like I said, Richardson's got a cannon arm. He's an athletic quarterback, no doubt about it, running the football, but he's just not putting up numbers and he's not finding the end zone. Really doesn't have much value. And he's definitely a quarterback I would look to sell off. And if I could get even a wide receiver in a deal, I say don't dump guys for anything. But in this case, I think Anthony Richardson, you just could dump him for anything of decency because he hasn't contributed and he really hasn't put up numbers. And also, I believe he's not 100% healthy as well. So that's a few plays I look to sell and trade for week 8 of the fantasy football season.